What does his text mean?
So frustrating.
Maybe he's just not that into me.
No, she really likes
I've
me.
always been bad
How
at
can I
flirting.
get her attention?
I'm ready for
I just
marriage.
want somebody to share my life.
Is this
relationship going anywhere?
Modern love made simple. This is Dates and Mates with Damona Hoffman.
There are over 100 million people using dating apps worldwide. So if you're not finding love there, we might have a problem. But luckily, I have the solution. I'm match dating expert Damona Hoffman, host of the groundbreaking TV series #Black Love and A Question of Love on FYI TV. And as you know, host of the Dates and Mates podcast. My dating advice has been featured in O Magazine, People Magazine, Essence Magazine, and more. I'm also a matchmaker and writer for the Washington Post Date Lab. And during my 13 years as a dating coach, I have found the secret to the perfect dating profile. I hear the same complaints. There are no good men or women online. Dating apps just don't work. I'm just really picky. And I have to be straight with you. That's not the real problem. The problem isn't the app. The problem isn't the dating pool. The problem is you don't have a profile that's attracting the right people to you. So whether you have a profile that's simply not working for you or you're overwhelmed and you don't know where to begin with creating a captivating profile that does the hard work for you, let me make online dating easy with the Profile Starter Kit. At profilestarterkit.com, I give a simple profile template to follow that works like a charm. It will work as a magnet to draw in the dates who are looking for someone just like you. How do I know? I met my husband online, and so have hundreds of people who have followed my system over the last 13 years. You can do it the hard way, or you can do it my way and let the profile attract quality dates to you. Go to profilestarterkit.com or click the link in the show notes to get started. Welcome back to Dates and Mates. We will be talking about body language and boundary setting. I know this is a challenge that a lot of you are having. I see your messages on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So we're here at Dates and Mates to give you what you need. And that's why I brought in the big guns for you. I'm bringing in Silvy Khoucasian, whose training includes a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, as well as a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Santa Barbara. She grew up in the USA as a young immigrant from the Middle East, and she's always been fascinated by the critical role that family cultures play in intimate relationships. She also has a background in theatrical arts, which allows her to use art and drama therapy in helping clients. Please give big smooches to Silvy Khoucasian. Thank you so much. Oh, those are your smooches.
I'll take those kisses.
So cute. Silvy, I'm just fascinated by cultural differences and how that really impacts the way that we interact with each other. Because like as Kim said in the first segment, it used to be that you just met and married someone from your local community, and that wasn't ever a topic that came up. And now as we have become more global and as dating apps have allowed us to meet people from anywhere in the world, we are seeing in communication things are more strained across cultures. So tell me a little bit more about your background as a sociologist and in therapy, how you see this playing out for couples that are from different worlds.
So much. First of all, our culture is the way that we see the world. It's the lens in which we have our values, our belief systems, what we feel like is morally right or wrong, whether we're more independent mindseted or we have more of a communal mindset. And so what I find is that even if we've been born here in the United States, even if we've adapted some of the cultures and the norms that are present here, what I find is that when two cultures collide, in the beginning of the relationship, things might appear to be totally fine and work outable, but there's implicit boundaries internally and values that are so subconscious that may not have been even present in people's minds, and when they start to bump up against those things, they start to have some really major problems. And it gives them an opportunity to really start to explore, okay, even though I don't necessarily want to have this mindset about something that my parents might have passed on to me or my culture passed on to me, but it's here in the room, and we have to look at it, because if we don't look at it, it's going to be like this huge elephant in the room that just creates a massive disconnection for couples.
How can you get aware of your programming? Because I think, we enter the world and we're like, this is just who I am. This is my, like you said, this is my lens. And sometimes we're not even aware that our perception is different from the other person in the relationship. How do you get aware of that?
I wish I could say there was a formula to know ahead of time, to know what these things are. But unfortunately, the way that we know what these programmings are is by when we get triggered. So we have to go in the conflict. We have to pay attention to, okay, I'm getting really triggered by this thing. It's the easy thing for me to do is to want to point the finger, blame, criticize, shame my partner for that. But here's an opportunity for me to really reflect on, what's actually happening here? I'm having a really huge response to something that might not necessarily seem to be a big deal, but there's obviously something happening for me. And so that's the opportunity to start looking in. That's the way in. And oftentimes when couples meet, that first stage of the relationship, they're high on love. Like, you're sharing they're in that it's even drug-induced state. All those hormones, those chemicals are racing through their bodies. But when we go into the second stage of love, which is when we don't start to idealize the relationship anymore, and we actually have more safety with the person that we're with, is when this stuff starts to come up. So couples that are fighting often think, oh my gosh, there's something wrong. This wasn't present in the beginning of the relationship. But when that starts to happen, if we can look at the fact that we're safe enough with each other for this stuff to come up, and if we can learn to not blame each other and to just actually look at where the deeper stuff is present within ourselves, that's when couples actually create the foundation and they build that solid base to build even more safety with each other.
It sounds easy when you say it that way.
Yeah.
I don't know how easy it is.
Not easy when you're in it at all.
But some of it also begins with understanding yourself and understanding the sort of baseline that your partner comes into the relationship with. And I know you also have a background in attachment theory and how couples are, like what their natural attachment style is. Can you tell us a little bit about the different ways people attach or detach in a relationship?
Absolutely. It's the primary meat and potatoes of my work. It's so essential. It's basically the way that we're wired to our primary caregiver as children, the way we bonded, which is usually our mother, but it's not always the case. Sometimes the father is the one that is more emotionally responsive and tuned into us, or an aunt or a grandparent. So there's a couple different ways that we can bond. People that have a parent or caregiver that's very present and emotionally attuned to them, they grow up to feel much more safe and trusting of other people and themselves. They're more flexible, they're more cooperative in relationships, and they just have an easier time working through things. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat.
It's sexy though.
People that are more avoidantly attached tend to have had a parent that was not very present with them at all. So they had to really shut down and regulate a lot of their own emotions. And so as adults, they really struggle in intimacy because somebody's just trying to connect with them just in a normal way. How are you? What's happening for you? Tell me, I want vulnerability from you. And that can feel really, really threatening for them because they're so used to kind of like being what Stan Tatkin calls an island. They're used to taking care of themselves. These are people that can be CEOs of company and they're amazingly successful, but they just really struggle to allow themselves to connect on that deep level. And then the third one is the anxiously attached. And these are people that have had a caregiver that was sometimes available and sometimes not. So that inconsistency of their presence and emotional response creates this really anxious nervous system for someone. And as an adult, these are people that really get triggered by things very easily. They sense little threats. Maybe their partner is just pulling away to go to work. They're having a normal day, but that triggers that part of them that brings up all those memories from the past. And I'm talking about 1-2 years old. It's happening on such a primal level. And when couples don't know that this is happening, they can't manage their emotional state. And if they don't learn, what the wiring is like for themselves, they can't communicate and own what's happening. And they're just, again, going to go into blame. You're doing this to me. I feel uncomfortable because I'm with you. Boom, leave the relationship.
See, and this is why, like, as we were talking about dating apps and how people are using the app, people are really quick to say, oh, the dating app is the problem. But I think the dating app, and tell me your opinions, but in my research, the dating app is not the issue. The behavior or the conditioning that you are not addressing is the issue. And the dating app is a vehicle that allows you to play that out in super speed. Are you seeing this as well, Kim, like with people that maybe have an anxious attachment?
Yeah, and actually what's interesting, there was a study done with Tinder and Bumble that it taps into the same part of the brain that the slot machines do, so it has an impact. So people who have a tendency towards addiction and that kind of thing will use the apps more obsessively. So I think, it's kind of yes and no, right? Like I think that people have a tendency to use it and it could be the symptom of a deeper problem for sure. But then also, I think it can be used as an excuse and a barrier for what is the real, issue.
Mm-hmm. And then as we're talking in relationships and people that are already partnered, let's say you're listening to this right now and you're like, oh, Silvy just described me.
That's
what happened to me as a child. And this is the pattern that I've been living out in my relationship. Are there steps that you recommend someone taking to move through it? Or like if you just have an anxious attachment style, are you just pretty much screwed?
You're screwed. No, I'm just kidding. Totally
Just don't be in a relationship.
Don't leave me.
I wouldn't have a job if that was the case. So luckily that's not the case. Absolutely. The first part of the work is recognizing how we're showing up. That's just the first step, the awareness piece to bringing the subconscious stuff up to the surface. The second piece is recognizing, okay, I've been in a couple different relationships with some great people, and eventually something happened, whether I was unsatisfied, it didn't work, we couldn't get through our conflicts. There's obviously, I'm the common denominator in all of these things. So it's recognizing where we carry behaviors that are more self-focused rather than relational focused. And there's always going to be things that we're going to do that are going to take care of ourselves, but there's going to be behaviors that people that are more avoidant or anxious have that pushes people away. So it's learning to own those things. If I'm more avoidant personally, so I was the person that swiped all those things, and until I got to the behavior, I was like, oh, this is just not going to work for me. So it's recognizing that if you're more avoidant, to really own that you're going to struggle with vulnerability. Frog is coming back.
The sexy frog.
The sexy frog. You're going to struggle with that. And your edge, your area of growth is leaning into those places slowly with a loving partner that you can also explain, hey, you know what? I noticed that I'm very distant in relationships. I really want to try to work through this. I'm going to need your help, and I'm going to need your patience. Sometimes in the middle of sharing, I'm just going to be like, okay, I got to stop. I'm at my max. I'm going to maybe go to the other room. This is really real stuff. And when we start to expand those edges for ourselves, it's going to trigger a lot of those negative memories, and learning to sit through those things and not make it about our partner and the relationship is where we get the breakthrough.
I have a question because I work with a lot of people who have that anxious attachment style. And what I find is what happens to them is the fear kicks in. And that they're scared to set boundaries, right? Because they're scared that person's going to leave. Totally. And so I was just curious of are there certain exercises or things that you have couples do to work through that?
So for anxiously attached, you're absolutely right. Their biggest fear is the being abandoned emotionally, or even just somebody leaving the relationship. So they don't have boundaries. They don't know how to stand up for themselves. And actually, they do a lot of what's called protest behavior, which is they act out because they still have needs, but they're not able to express those needs directly. So they communicate them in all kinds of sloppy ways. So the first thing, that I support people do is practice to communicate those needs more directly.
Yes.
And learn teaching techniques, whether it's grounding techniques, breathing techniques. But, the biggest breakthrough people have is making sense of this story. Because a lot of times someone comes to me, I feel so anxious, I'm dating, but I just, I need to know when this person's going to call me. And I was like, let's look at that. Let's see where that is coming from for you. And making sense of that story and helping to normalize, of course, you're going to feel like that. You had somebody that was not present for you at such a critical age, and helping to bring compassion helps them to be able to regulate some of their own experiences as they start to get triggered.
And we've talked a lot about verbal communication, but a lot of communicating with a partner is actually in what you're not saying, and a lot of times in body language and your nonverbal your nonverbal communication. So Kim, I want to bring it to you because you do work with clients on body language. What are some of the signs that if you see your partner like doing certain behaviors, what are some of the signs that it might be time to sit down and have a conversation or support them in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy if you look at the statistic that 93% of communication's nonverbal. That's crazy. Wow. So it's like what you say isn't even as important as how you show up and how you present and what you're, letting people know about how you're feeling, because you could say one thing, but then your body says a totally different thing. Right. And that incongruency may cause mixed messages. And so what I say, I see it played out in two different ways, right? Like I work with body language out in the dating world and I do these wing girl sessions and helping people, teaching them how to be more approachable, how to be more charismatic and likable, because that's part of attraction. And so I always tell people it's not changing who you are, but it's showing up in a way so that people get to know you, who you are. So that's with your clothes and the attitude that you have. And so when we break those barriers and you show up by, doing things like making eye contact and smiling and, standing in close proximity to the person so that they feel close to you, those are the things that indicate, hey, yeah, I don't bite, I want to get to know you. And yeah, just saying hi is nice, like the simple things that we used to do rather than being in our phones.
I'll message you and I'll send you a WhatsApp.
Right. I'll send you a hi, emoji. So, but then in terms of couples, that's also crucial, because what I find is that there's a state of complacency that couples often get. And it's almost they get too comfortable with each other. And I say this in a very normalized way, that we forget the power of touch. We forget the power of just looking in each other's eyes and saying, I got you. Right. And there's something so beautiful about that. So even in the heat of the moment or anytime there's stress, a look in the eye can say so much more.
Yes, you just confirmed everything I said in my masterclass. If you guys haven't seen that episode, I talk about having sec. S-E-C.
Oh my God, I love that.
With a person that you're trying to send a nonverbal message to on a date. So that's smiling, eye contact, and casual touch.
See, we didn't even know that.
We didn't even know that.
Simpatico.
It must be true.
I know.
Therefore, two of us say it. It's confirmed.
It's got to be true.
It's confirmed. But it is true, and it's something that's so simple. And I think, especially in the dating world, as you begin to practice these behaviors, they become second nature. But there's this feeling, especially as women, I think there's this feeling that we're supposed to just know how to do that. But if you haven't been working the behavior, if you've maybe been focused on your job and you've been in a workplace where you're trying to turn off any sexual attraction, or you've been in a relationship where you're focused on one person and now you're having to open up, you have to sort of relearn that behavior.
So true.
Yes, and on top of it, cultural differences too. I was actually flown to Shanghai to do some dating coaching, and it was so interesting, and it made so much more sense why my client was struggling, because as we were talking about before, she was straddling both cultures, and she didn't know how to navigate the nonverbal stuff, because in Shanghai, you don't make eye contact like we do here, right? And so I think understanding the different nuances is important.
And let me go to you, Silvy, since you do also work with cultural differences. If you are finding that you and your partner have a different sort of nonverbal cultural language, what are some ways that you can bridge that gap and figure out what your partner's comfort level is?
I love this conversation because 93% of the body language and the nonverbal is so interesting, because it really shows that one of the biggest challenges is, for me, it's very easy to read the facial expression of somebody that's Armenian. Middle Eastern. It's just because that's so familiar in that's my culture. It's there's literally things I can pick up so quickly. But somebody from a different race, from a different nationality, my brain actually can't read a lot of things that's happening on someone's face. And I never knew that this actually happens. And it's learning to read, and that takes time to build that recognition in our brain. So I would misread my partner constantly. I was like, "You're looking at me like you're really upset with me." And he's like, "I'm not upset with you at all." So what I had to learn to do was to check my own assumptions, because of course that's what we do. We make assumptions about things and we think we're right. No, but this is what I'm seeing. I'm 100% correct. So I would, this is one of the things I teach my clients is asking with curiosity and not assuming that you're 100% correct. So honey, I'm noticing that you're looking at me a certain way. The way that I'm reading it is that you're upset with me. Is that true? And that way it gives the other person an opportunity to A, not get defensive, but B, to have empathy and to want to comfort you rather than wanting to, close off that connection. So absolutely, cultural differences, not making meaning about things that may be absolutely not true. Somebody from a different culture may be more reserved, and we can take that as they're not interested, but in reality, they are maybe really, really interested in you. So
we could
checking
have a whole
in.
conversation about
Right?
that. But that actually reminds me of a situation in my own relationship. So for the newer listeners, I'm Black and Russian Jewish, which means I'm loud. Like I come from a loud culture, and just the baseline in my home was at a high decibel level. And I found it interesting as I got into a relationship with my husband, who's from a more soft-spoken sort of upbringing. It's also not just the nonverbal communication. It's not the content of what you're saying, but it's also the tone.
Yes, tonality.
So he was like, I would be complaining about something that happened at work, and he would kind of shut down, and I'm like, "What's going on here?" And he'd say, "Well, I feel like you're screaming at me. I feel like you're mad at me." I'm like, "No, this is just, we just talk really loud. This is just how we do."
Absolutely.
So it was an opportunity there when I noticed it, when I saw his nonverbal and I noticed it, to just own the elephant in the room. That's so much of dating and relationship. Just
Oh my
own what
God.
you're seeing.
And communicate it.
Yeah, and but not to take it as truth, like you said. This is my perception. Let's talk about it.
And that's the tricky part, because if we can't trust our own perception, which feels like that's such an important part of our identity, who are we? So much of the reason why couples fight and have a hard time owning their stuff and apologizing or admitting they're wrong is because we identify so much with what we see. If I can't rely on what I'm seeing or perceiving, what can I rely on? It almost feels like I can't even trust myself. So that's a massive surrender. Talk about uncertainty, like all these contracts and boundaries serve an amazing purpose, but they also rob us from the humility and some of the uncertainty that is part of life.
I like the uncertainty. I think it's fun, but a lot of people run from that. And I was talking in the first segment about boundary setting the rules of your relationship. So I want to move this conversation into boundaries. I see that this is something that a lot of people are struggling with, both in a relationship. And Kim, I'll begin with you. As you're entering into a new relationship or dating, trying to convey what your line is to someone new can be really scary.
Oh, yeah. And I think it goes back to that vulnerability. I mean, I think so many people get in their heads and they have all these worries. And then if you have that anxious attachment style, it's even amplified more. And so to ask for what you need rather than, and I see women doing this probably more so than men, is actually not shape-shifting into something that other people want, but what they want. And it starts from the minute you say hello to somebody. The minute you say hello, like I have this whole social engagement formula that I teach people when I'm out and about with them, and it's how to move conversation from your head to your heart so that you are actually sharing and emoting more rather than just firing facts back and forth so that people really feel you. And part of that feeling is what connects us. to each other. But that's really scary. I mean, that's part of the boundary setting, but it doesn't have to be so serious. That's the other thing I want to say is that then women might take it to the nth degree and then have these like 10 commandments of, what they need in order to have a successful first date and that kind of thing. So again, the recalibration, it's somewhere in the middle, but you can have fun with it too. So, if a guy wants to take you to a certain restaurant and you don't like that food, you can say in a very cute and fun way, I like this or that better, and it doesn't have to be, no, I don't really do that food. Like there's ways that you can be sexy and fun about it.
And it doesn't have to mean something about the relationship because he chose that kind of food.
Exactly.
I mean, the amount of reading into decisions, I think it's really disadvantaging us in dating.
Yeah.
I also want to just add on setting the boundary about what you're comfortable with on a date. Because I see a lot of people feeling like if they're asked a question, they need to answer it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that information, I always say, needs to be earned. But I see some people are uncomfortable with holding that boundary. It might go back to what you were saying earlier, that they're afraid that person, if you set the boundary, might run away.
And don't forget to have fun with it. So often I see out and about, everyone's asking what you do for a living, for instance. And maybe you don't want to talk about what you do for a living. And I highly advise not to because it goes down a rabbit hole really fast and people get into their masculine energy and that boring conversation. But you can answer a question with a question and have fun with it. Like, what do you think I do? And then it becomes so much more fun and then it becomes more of a game. So I think if we let go of some of the seriousness of all of this too, and because that's the first connection should be more fun and flirty, and you can still set boundaries at the same time.
That's great advice. And I'll just add one little trick that I do is everybody wants to talk about themselves on a date, right?
I know.
And they want you to make them feel good about themselves. So if you turn it back around, if they ask what you do for work and you turn it back around, why would I talk about work when I'm with a handsome guy like you? He's not going to be like, well, I really want to know about work.
Yeah. And really,
Just
they don't
turn it.
care.
They don't
At the end,
They're just
they don't.
trying to come up with topics for
Yeah.
that 7% of communication.
Exactly.
So let's talk about in a relationship boundaries. That is a lot harder when you've established a certain rule book for the relationship and maybe your comfort level has been challenged. What do you do then, Silvy?
So when you're in the deeper part of the relationship, you start to notice where, and like you said, there's a middle, I often find that when I work with boundaries, there's my boundary and then there's my partner's boundary. And oftentimes, because I'm asking for something that's important for me, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other person can always give that. Right. And so that's one of the biggest struggles I have with people is we have certain boundaries that are non-negotiables. Like I can't be in a relationship if this boundary is not respected. I know that from my past experiences. It's just not possible. And then there's certain boundaries that are much more flexible and that can be negotiated and that can be met somewhere in that middle space. Because if we keep coming up against something that we both kind of have to stretch, and there's growing pains that can come with that,
right.
And I think that boundaries aren't always immediately going to be understood by our partner. And I'm not talking about the big ones, like, we're in the middle of sleeping together and I feel pain and I'm saying, stop. That is a boundary that absolutely needs to be respected. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about other kinds of boundaries that can be more nuanced. Like for example, in the beginning of my relationship, I knew that daily communication was just important for me. I knew from the past, if I didn't hear from my partner once a day, I would be really anxious and it would just not be good for the relationship. So I teach people how to frame their boundaries as a way to protect the relationship and not just make it about themselves.
Right.
I want to connect with you daily because I know that just is going to help me feel our relationship feels so much more solid.
Help me help you.
Exactly. Exactly. That framing and just not making it just about ourselves. And if I'm going to set a firm boundary, making sure I then go back to my partner and take care of them, especially if they might feel rejected or they might feel like they're doing something wrong.
It's a two-way street, certainly in
Absolutely.
relationships. So I've been so engrossed in this conversation that I realized we haven't gotten to technically dating and talked about your questions at home. So producer Leah, let's move into the last segment of the day, technically dating.
Technically dating.
Okay, this question comes to us from a listener who says, I've been out with this guy 4 times and he's everything I want on paper, but nothing physical has happened yet. I'm not having butterflies, but I'm still curious about him, as you say. Should I keep seeing him and hope that feelings develop? Kim, you're making a face, so I'm going to go to you first.
Absolutely should continue. If there's enough there, I always say keep going. And if there's not that physical thing happening, you also have to take a look at what you're doing. Like, I'm not sure what she's doing to bring that out. He might be really shy and looking for a signal that, hey, it's okay. You can come closer. You can kiss me. So again, it's a two-way street, but we don't know the situation and what she's bringing.
Is there a point where she's been on 4 dates with him? Is there a point where you're like, okay, if you're not physically attracted to him by this point, it's probably not going to be a thing? Maybe you're friends.
Yeah, it could be like a friend zone thing that ends up happening. I always do like a chemistry analysis with people, and I look at like kind of 4 domains: the emotional chemistry, the physical chemistry, intellectual, and spiritual. And I have people put a percentage in each domain and where they're falling. I mean, if everything is really high, that's why I say like keep going, because sometimes that physical attraction can really develop, and those are beautiful, long-lasting relationships. But if other things are kind of low and you're just kind of trying and it's just not there, then lost cause.
That's great advice. Silvy, I'll toss the last question over to you. This lady says, I'm not 100% sure if this guy likes me or he's just being nice. How do I figure this out? Should I just straight up ask him? It's modern times.
This is a tricky one.
This is an American show. We'd have a lot of listeners from other countries. Hello, Switzerland. Hello, Canada. But hello Ghana, right? We're also charting in Ghana. Wonderful. Ooh, cool. So, but here in America, can a lady say like, hey, I'm kind of into you, or we should do something without it being, Kim is like,
I'm
holding her face. What do you think, Silvy? Yeah, go for it.
I mean, I think, how many days has it been?
Well, this one is just another question. She just says that she's not sure if this guy likes her.
Okay, so basically we don't even know if they've gone on a date yet.
We don't. It sounds like not.
Yeah. I think this really depends on the kind of role you want to play in your relationship. And I think that's a very personal choice. I think some women don't really mind taking more of that initiatory role, and that really works for them. Some women really do want to feel more pursued and to feel like, you know, they're dropping the handkerchiefs here and there, and there's somebody is taking and attuning to that and responding. So I think you have to be really honest with yourself and really see which role you want to play. It doesn't mean you can't break out of that role and try different things, but it is really I think making that choice, it does put you in more of a feminine or masculine energy. And I think that is an important piece. It can be very, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Controversial to say it in those terms. But I do think it's important to get clear. And if you're okay with, you know, taking on more of that initiatory role, because that is the role you're going to be playing, go for it. And if you just own it. Yes. You know?
Address the elephant in the room. Kim has completely bitten through her cheek over here.
Are you going to give me the floor, please?
No, here.
It's funny you use the handkerchief metaphor, because I was literally, you took the words out of my mouth. There's a difference between dropping the hanky and crumpling it up and throwing it at a guy, right? So I just want to say
repeatedly.
Exactly. That's the assertive masculine energy that guys don't like either. So there's ways to drop the hints, and it goes back to body language.
And having sex. Go back to the masterclass episode.
I love that. Yeah, where you can give the indication that you're interested, but he's probably looking for those smoke signals, and you know, 9 times out of 10, we're just not giving enough signals to them.
Well, you guys have
just
given
a little bit more body touch is always a good thing.
Always a good thing.
Oh, you feel good. I like that. Yeah.
Well, you've given me all the feels today, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us on episode, what is this, 247 of Dates and Mates. Wow. Silvy, you can find online. She's on Instagram at Silvy Khoucasian, and we'll put all the links in the show notes. Or you can visit her website, silvykhoucasian.com. It's very It's very hard for me to spell
That's
it.
okay.
But go to the show notes and we'll just click it, right? And then,
Yes.
or just Google. I'm sure you're the only Silvy Khoucasian.
I think I am.
That does this kind of work. And she also has a new a program called her Boundaries program, right? So you can find that. We'll put that link in the show notes as well if you're in a relationship and looking for help with setting boundaries and having this communication that we've been talking about. Kim Seltzer, such a pleasure to have
So
you, my
fun.
friend, on the show. You're on Twitter at Seltzer Kimberly, Instagram Kimberly Seltzer.
Kimmy Seltzer, actually.
Kimmy Seltzer.
Yeah,
That's right.
I know all these Kimmy.
But most importantly, the Charisma Quotient podcast is happening weekly. Yeah?
Yes,
Weekly
you can
podcast.
find that on iTunes and Stitcher, all that.
We will link to all of those good things. And thank you so much, both
Thank
of you, for being on the
Thank you. Such a
show.
pleasure.